Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. We're diving back into the college football world. We're going to get to and FSU as we build up to the season, but I wanted to take a different approach today. We're going to be talking about who I believe are the head coaches with the most pressure going into 2024. Now, some of these coaches might not be fired, but the expectations on them need to be met. And there's a wide variety not wide variety, but there's coaches who have an impeccable resume, and there's coaches who are just starting out pretty much. So let's just dive right in and see how things are going. So I'm going to start off with who I think has the most pressure on them this year. That's Ryan Day at Ohio State. Now, to understand why we got here, let's go through the resume first. Because when I was talking about impeccable resume, this is the person I was talking about. He's 56-8 overall, 39-3 in the Big Ten, 2-4 in bowl games, 1-3 in the college football playoffs. That 3 in the 39-3 Big Ten record, that's the problem. 3 straight years of losing to Michigan. You lost in, so 3 straight years. And to add salt to the wound, Michigan won it all last year. They won the national championship. That's something Ohio State hasn't done since 2014. They reached the national championship game under Ryan Day, under the COVID-shortened season when I believe they went 7-1 or something like that. And then they lost in the championship game. But think about this. You bring in Will Howard at QB. You bring in Junkins at running back, the one from Ole Miss. You get the number one. Well, you also get Julian Sayin, a 5-star QB who was originally committed to Alabama in the 2024 recruiting class. He was committed, and then Nick Saban left, and then so instead of decommitting, because he already signed the national letter of intent, he counts as a transfer. So Julian is going to be competing with Aaron Noland for the future of the program. Aaron Noland was a 4-star quarterback coming out in 2024. And then on top of that, you get the number one transfer in the transfer portal in safety, Caleb Downs, another Alabama guy. You combine that with getting the number one high school recruit in the country, wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, and another consensus top 5 recruiting class. It's all or nothing this year for Ryan Day, because now Jim Harbaugh's not there in Michigan anymore. You have the added depth of UCLA, USC, Oregon, Washington in the Big Ten, 12-team college football playoff. There's no way that they should miss the college football playoffs. There's absolutely not. If they miss it, he's fired. But if I'm not mistaken, I believe Ohio State has the highest over-under win total at 10.5 in the country. So those are the expectations that they're dealing with. He has to meet them. I'm not saying it's a national championship or bust, but you have to beat Michigan. And then you have to beat anybody else you face pretty much. You're going to have the talent outside of maybe running to Oregon and stuff like that, but it's going to be a tough year for Ryan Day if he doesn't get the job done in terms of running the table against your biggest rivals, reaching the Big Ten championship game at least, being a top seed in the college football playoffs, not just making it at number 10. He's got to be in the 1 through 4 range. That's why he has the most pressure, because he's been winning. 56-8, folks. 3 of those losses are Michigan. 1 was to Georgia in the college football playoffs, where, again, perception is reality. I remain convinced that if Marvin Harrison Jr. did not get a concussion that game, Ohio State's winning that game. And not Georgia. But he got injured. And you have enough wide receiving recruits over the past X amount of years, 5-star after 5-star after 5-star after 5-star, as you should be able to weather the storm of losing Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, he's a level all by himself, but there's no depth on that offense to make it work. But yeah, I mean, you're pretty much only losing to the best of the best. But when you're winning everything else, you have to expect a championship eventually. And now that Michigan won last year, it's even more fuel to the fire. So again, I'm not saying he's going to be fired. I don't think there's expectations that he will be fired. He is going to make the college football playoffs. Barring some crazy injuries and just falling off a cliff, Ohio State should be in the college football playoffs. And Ryan Day should be safe for another year. If he loses to Michigan in Shamar Moore's first year, I know he lost to him last year because Jim Harbaugh wasn't actually coaching last year for that game. I don't know if he can survive that. As crazy as that sounds, losing 4 straight years to Michigan, I don't know if the Buckeye Nation is willing to accept that. Now, if they lose to Michigan and win the national championship, all is forgiven. But that's just something about losing to Michigan, man, that really puts it in another gear. And that's why you as ridiculous as it sounds, someone who's 39-3 in the Big Ten, 2-4 in bowl games, 1-3 in the college football playoff, 0-3 against Michigan. That's what's mattering. 56-8 overall. It's crazy. But he does have the most pressure with the amount of talent, the amount of high-end talent, quality over quantity in the transfer portal. Another great recruiting class. Just got to step it up this year. Got to win big. We're going to stay in the Big Ten. And we're going to go with James Franklin at Penn State. This is a guy who, same core problems as Ohio State. They don't win as much, but they definitely don't win the big games. And that's the problem. James Franklin is, if you look at the body of work, the record dictates that he's a really good coach. Is he a top-tier coach? It's hard to judge nowadays, but I mean, he's got to be a top 15 coach in college football. Just for tenure and his ability to win. I think top 15 would be safe. At least top 20, but top 15, I think. Not to dwell on that. He's been there for 10 seasons. He's had 5 with double-digit wins. I believe 4 of them were 11 wins and 1 was 10. And then he had 1 9-win seasons and a few 7-win seasons when he first started. And the COVID year was really weird. I think he went 4-5 or something. Really just out of left field. 2016 Big Ten champions. But again, comes up short against Michigan and Ohio State. We're talking about 7 in a row that they've lost to Ohio State. We're talking about 3-7 versus Michigan overall. And the big thing is the much heralded 2022 recruiting class that was led by the likes of Drew Aller at QB, Nick Singleton at running back. You had linebacker Absul Carter, and then you had this kid I think is going to step up a lot this year because he lost some talent to the NFL. Abdul Carter, not Absul. And then defensive lineman Danny Dennis Sutton is really going to step up and shine this year, I believe. But those core players, they're in their 3rd year. It's time to step it up. They fired their offensive coordinator. They got the guy from Kansas to come in who ran the 8th best rushing offense in all of college football. So the reason why, again, expectations. You had this kid, Drew Aller, who you said, this kid's the future. This kid's the future. And in the 10 wins, they averaged 41.9 points per game. Again, the key is 13.5 points against Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, that says it all. This is a team that is likely going to make the college football playoffs when push comes to shove. But if they don't, what do you do with James Franklin? There's a lot of talent on this team. You got two great running backs. You got a highly touted quarterback. You got some good defensive pieces. It's got to step it up. You got to see where you land. And again, I know I said it's highly likely that they're going to make the college football playoff. You guys got to realize this 12-team playoff was basically built for the SEC and the Big Ten. It's their invitational. I mean, if Penn State has 3 losses, they're getting in over a 2-loss Clemson team, or I mean, maybe even a 1-loss Clemson team. You know, because of the strength of schedule. I mean, if we look at Penn State's schedule, this is what we're talking about. They're going to be facing USC, Ohio State, Washington. No Michigan. That's crazy. But, you know, it's okay. West Virginia, that's a win. Bowling Green's a win. Kent State's a win. Illinois is a win. UCLA, that should be a win. At USC, I think you give that to them. So they're 6-0 at Wisconsin. I think they can take Wisconsin. You 7-0. They lose to Ohio State 7-1. Washington, let's say they lose that one 7-2. Purdue's a win 8-2. Minnesota 9-2. Maryland 10-2. You don't think they lose to Ohio State and Washington, they beat everybody else, that they're not going to be in the college football playoffs? That's what I'm saying. It's an invitational for the Big Ten. It's invitational for the SEC. So he's got to make it. I mean, if they lose to USC, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, if they lose to their tough team, I mean, I don't think UCLA is going to be all there. You know, Chip Kelly's not there. They lost Moore. They lost a decent amount of talent on that team. So, I mean, if you lose your 3 biggest games, I guess it's Wisconsin. No, well, USC. I mean, if they lose to USC, Ohio State, Washington, they play a close game against Wisconsin. I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting. So he's just got to step up for his team and see how it goes, because they need to win and they need to make the college football players just to appease the fan base, because they're starting to get tired. He just signed a massive contract extension a few years ago, so it's almost the notion of you don't want to find out what else is out there. You need this to work out with James Franklin, because it's seemed for a few cycles now that there isn't. And again, these hires don't always work out, but let's go back in time where, you know, Tom Herman was considered a great hire for Texas because he worked there as a grad assistant and he did really well at the University of Houston. And everybody thought, man, imagine the resources at Texas. He did have a 10-win season, but it wasn't all there, you know? Now they have Steve Sarkisian. You know, they fired okay, I'll put it this way. They fired him when he was doing decent, and then he saw the opportunity to get Sark. There aren't any Sarks out there, you know? And it's the same thing with like when Scott Frost was hired in Nebraska. He came off the undefeated season at UCF. The prodigal son returns, you know? Scott Frost, Tom Herman. Great hires. In hindsight, not really. Is there someone who's been at Penn State previously, you know, that can work out? I don't know. Is there a hot coordinator that's going to show up this year that's going to really impress people? Maybe, but you haven't really seen that. been a lot of retreads and recycles. Either way, James Franklin has to step up this year. Number 3. My favorite one to talk about. Sweet, sweet Sunbelt Billy, as he's been affectionately called by other people within the state of Florida. It's Billy Napier, head coach at, obviously, University of Florida. He's 11-14 after 2 seasons. One of those was led by first-round QB draft pick Anthony Richardson. You squeaked into a bowl game with him, going 6-7. Well, you were 6-6. You lost the bowl game, 6-7. And then last year you go 5-7. So you lost some top end talent in the transfer portal. You've had some of these kids talk about the lack of development they have under the coaching. It's a large coaching staff. Some people call it a bloated coaching staff. Billy's not giving up play calling duties in year 3. And he bet big on this 2024 recruiting class. Going into National Signing Day, they were consensus top 5. I don't know if they peaked at 3 or 4 going into National Signing Day. And then flip, and they fell to 14th. You go from consensus top 5 to outside the top 10. Not a good look. And folks, this might be one of the most brutal schedules I've ever seen in watching college football. And I don't mean that as in a hot take or an exaggeration. We'll go through it. Just so you know, I think we talked about Ohio State having a 10.5 over-under. Penn State's over-under is 9.5. Florida's is 5.5. And this is why. Miami visits them in the swamp. Yeah, I think Miami takes that. Samford is your only cupcake game this year. You're 1-1. Texas A&M 1-2. But hypothetically, let's do best case scenario. They beat Texas A&M. So right now you're 2-1. Mississippi State, you're 3-1. UCF, you're 4-1. At Tennessee, you're 4-2. Versus Kentucky, you're 4-3. Here's where it starts, folks. You get the bye week. November 2nd, Jacksonville, Florida, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. The neutral game against Georgia. That's a loss. Then you go and you play at Texas. That's a loss. LSU comes into the swamp. That's a loss. Ole Miss comes into the swamp. That's a loss. And then you finish at Florida State, at Doak Campbell. That's a loss. That's a 5-game stretch against Georgia, a 2-time national championship winner in the past 3 years. Texas, Sark has that well-oiled machine up and running. LSU, you figure Brian Kelly's going to fix that defense. It cannot be as bad as it was last year. And they're still going to be really good on offense. Ole Miss took all the chips they had, and they're going all in this year. With all the transfers they got from the transfer portal on the defensive side, offensive side, Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss are going all in this year. Florida State is going to have a significant talent advantage. They're going to win. So basically what you're hoping for before you get to November is you're going to have to get, you're 0-5 in those games. You're 0-5. You got to find, in a 12-game schedule, you got to find 7 wins in 7 other games. You're not going to go 7-0. The over-under 5.5. Let's say they beat Miami. Give them the Miami game, which I don't think it's going to happen. Miami, Samford, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, UCF. That's 5. Let's say they start by some miracle. They start off 5-0. You think they're going to beat Tennessee? I don't think so. You think they're going to beat Kentucky? Maybe. That's your 6th win. That means you're going to start off 5-0 and you're going to beat Kentucky, and that's going to get you a winning record. That's going to get you into a bowl game. That ain't happening. Spoiler alert. Realistically, what I see happening: Miami L, Samford win, Texas A&M. I think that's an L. Mississippi State, sure, give him that one. UCF, give him that one. Tennessee, Kentucky. I mean, let's give them Kentucky. They have 4 wins. I don't see that happening, folks. I don't see a winning season. I don't. I really don't. And when that happens, Billy's out. And the crazy part is, we talked about this a few years ago with football in the Sunshine State here on this podcast. One of the earliest episodes we did. And you noticed a trend with the coaching hires post Urban Meyer. Will Muschamp had an 11-win season mixed into his 3 years or so at the University of Florida. Jim McElwain had a winning, I believe he had a 10 or 11 winning season. Dan Mullen had a double-digit win season. Sunbelt Billy has not had that benefit of that boost of a double-digit win season. And I don't think he's making it out of year 3. He's got a lot of pressure on him, and the schedule is doing him no favors. I got Billy Napier out at Florida. If he makes it to the end of the season, I will be surprised. We'll see. Number 4, this isn't meant as a hot take. It's not meant in a disparaging manner. I just think that when you look at how this team is being built, there's some serious problems moving forward. And that's Colorado, led by Deion Sanders. Now, Primetime had a great start to the beginning of the football season. They started off 3-0. They had 2 of the top 5 most watched games in college football. And they finished 1-8. In conference play, you finish 4-8 on the year. It's the reason why there's a lot of pressure is because he has to hit this year. Shedeur Sanders isn't staying another year. Travis Hunter isn't staying another year. Those guys are going to be going to the NFL after 2024. And if you don't win this year, we talked about with Florida State multiple times in our Mike Norvell, where's the proof of concept? What can Deion sell at Colorado? He only had 11 high school recruits in the 2024 recruiting class. I had to check that to make sure, because I remember reading a while ago that they only had 6. So you did get a good tackle. But again, you got 25 kids so far. The spring transfer window just opened up a few days ago, so we'll see how that goes. But as right now, you have 25 transfers coming in. You have others leaving, by the way. But that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to properly build a team. It's not sustainable. So if they fail to do something big this year, where does that leave Deion? Because if you look at Deion's trajectory as a head coach, it's all about following Shedeur. And I'm not saying that he's latching on to him. That's his son. That's a completely different element. He coached him in high school. Then he went to Jackson State. He coached him there. He went to Colorado. He took him with him. What's going to happen now once he graduates? That's what we're talking about. Is he going to have that same desire to help all these kids? is it going to really push him the same way? Because Shedeur is a good talent. I'm not saying he's going to be a top tier first round pick. I'm not saying he's going to go in the top 5, 10 picks. I think there's a few quarterbacks that are ranked ahead of him. But he is going to be drafted at a good position. Probably goes in the first round. Just off of hype and certain production as well. But are you going to flip someone like that in the transfer portal? Are they really going to choose somewhere like Colorado? Like, even when we take someone like Jalen Rashada, 4-star recruit that was supposed to go to Florida, the collective, the NIL deal fell through with the collective. He ends up going to Arizona State. Now he's transferring out. Supposedly, the rumor is the University of Georgia is his preferred choice right now. If you can't get someone like Jalen Rashada, to kind of, and I'm not saying specifically him, I'm talking about that talent, that 4-star talent that had some injuries or didn't get that playing time, so there's still that shine on him. Are you going to get that type of talent to come to Colorado? Because again, proof of concept. These kids are transferring for an opportunity. That offensive line last year was atrocious. They've built the resources this year to see if they can fix that. Will that be enough? We'll see. You got to look at their schedule. By the way, their over-under, I believe, is 5.5 as well. It is 5.5. North Dakota State, Nebraska, Colorado State, Baylor, UCF, Kansas State, Arizona, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State. I mean, where are all the wins there? Oklahoma State's probably a loss. Kansas is a loss. Utah's a loss. Texas Tech's a loss. Cincinnati, that's where one win's going to be. Arizona's a loss. Kansas State should be a loss. UCF should be a loss. Baylor, are they still in shambles? Colorado State should be a win. North Dakota State. So you got 4 wins there. Nebraska, 5. I mean, are they going to have a 1-win improvement? Is that really a lot to sell high school kids or transfers? Hey, we went from 4-8 to 5-7. Now, don't get me wrong. I was about to say franchise. This college was in the dumpster. 4-8 is an actual accomplishment, regardless of how you feel about Deion. Now, it's a brand new team, basically. But now that year 1's done, you got to show, again, proof of concept. You got to show that you're able to recruit, that you're able to build a team, that it's not just one-and-done players. Even some of the high school kids you recruited, Cormani McClain, that was one of the best recruits. And we're not talking about transfers. We're talking about kids, 18-year-olds who were committing to the program, not transfers like Travis Hunter or Shedeur Sanders. Cormani McClain was one of the, if not the best recruit in the modern era for Colorado. He's out after 1 year. If you're convincing some of these kids to come, and again, I'm not absolving Cormani McClain. There's plenty of rumors and stories out there about his work ethic and how he doesn't want it. All these generic types of, word salads that they use to describe these kids. Maybe he finds a different coaching staff that learns how to get it out of him. But if you can't sustain the high school recruiting and you're just constantly doing these 5th-year seniors or, kids that are trying to get one more shot. I mean, you saw it on Instagram the other day. Shedeur Sanders, no, it was Shiloh, I believe, was saying, defensive players in the transfer portal DM me, offensive players DM Shedeur Sanders, and in parentheses, this isn't last chance you. It's the perception of that. Deion doesn't want to go out recruiting. He's getting his kids to recruit. It almost comes off that other teams could pitch Deion as lazy. no matter what he does behind closed doors. It's the perception. So can Deion win? I don't think so. However, will he do enough to convince recruits or transfers to go over there? Maybe. That's the key. It may not be a mass improvement. Even if they go 5-7 instead of 4-8, it's how competitive you are. It's not getting your doors blown off every single game. That can be different. Again, the records might say something, but the overall way the team is playing might be different. I usually try to do 5 for these types of podcasts, but we're kind of running a little long here. So I'm going to leave it on a cliffhanger. The 5th person who has a lot of pressure, and I'm going to do a podcast just on them alone, is Mario Cristobal. There's a lot to dive in here, folks. It's not just the contract. It's not just the results on the field. The investment on the field for the school. It's other stuff. And we'll get into that in our next podcast, hopefully. So maybe I might record some other stuff with the boys, or do some different types of college football stuff. So we're going to wrap that one up another time. But as of right now, we're going to wrap this podcast up. So it was a long one. I know I haven't recorded in a while solo, so trying to get back into that. Don't forget, we got to do it all over again. I usually do at the beginning of the videos with Miguel and Eric, but don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, do all that stuff. YouTube, you'll find us there. You'll find us on Apple Podcasts. You'll find us on Spotify, wherever you choose out of those 3. Just give us some feedback, wherever you can. Thanks for listening, folks. Really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.